If you or someone you know has a story, encounter, or experience you would like to share with my viewers, please send it to my email at stories@whatlurksbeneath.com. Thank you. I was driving home from work on a 6-lane highway, heading west into Hamilton, Ontario. As I drove on my side of the highway, I saw a dog cross from the left side to the right. That area is full of trees, bushes, channels, and ravines of water that are offshoots of the lake. When I saw the dog, it was approximately half of a kilometer ahead of me. The astonishing aspect of this dog, well, I'm certain it was a dog, was its length from nose to rump, excluding its tail, covered the almost full width of the lane, which is 8 feet where it was heading, was back into a small valley filled with heavy forestation and another ravine. I couldn't believe a dog could actually grow to that size. I still remind my boyfriend of this occasionally. About 3 years ago, I encountered what I could only explain then as a deformed hyena. It was in the later part of the day, under dusky conditions, and I was small game hunting at the time. I did not feel any fear because I was carrying my over-under shotgun at the time. Its eyes were kind of strange, I remember, and it had very pointy ears. Its head was almost cartoon-like as its snout had messed up overgrown hair. Its fangs looked unusually long as well. For some time before I seen it, I heard a very, very long coughing noise, like a cat coughing up a fur ball. However, this went on for a long time, so whatever did had strong and large lung capacity. I doubt a lynx or cat could have been the noisemaker. I have no idea if this dog-like creature was the source of the strange and long coughing fit. Another strange thing along this trail, I always seem to be under the watchful eyes of a flying turkey vulture. Now, these are newcomers to Alberta, but a few mating pairs have been reported up here, and this is common local knowledge that no one questions. This coughing bout I have heard at least once before in this specific area. Never seen this source in the nearby dense boreal forest. This wooded area is kind of on the edge of an oil exploration, and is an active work area now, so I don't hunt there anymore. Which all in all is too bad, as it's chock full of small game, such as rabbits. During this encounter, the woods were unnaturally quiet. It's hard to move in many areas off trail because the evergreen limbs reach so far close to the ground. An upright person would be stooped over to move any kind of speed in many areas. Quadrupeds have a definite advantage here over people, and the area is also ridged with swamps and marshy, very uneven ground that one can easily turn your ankle on. There were other strange moments then. I think when I did see this animal, I sat down on a large rock with my gun across my lap and caught the first glimpse as it was circling me. I think to catch my scent on the wind. I just caught a glimpse of it passing behind a tree in the dusky light conditions. It had hocks like a dog, but as it came around the tree, still on all 4 legs, I noticed the front legs were longer than the back legs. Its back legs bowed upward, and I got the distinct impression its frontal back, chest, and leg muscles were much more pronounced and muscular than its back legs. I believe the front coat was a lighter color, with some reddish tones too. It looked like a hyena loose in North America to my very own eyes. It was not a black bear. I'm very familiar with bears. It was canine-like, but not any canine I have ever seen before or since. My brother, who was not there, found a near-perfect picture of another critter online, on another crypto site, and the picture was said to be taken near the very same Wisconsin River. In the picture, it looked like it was on a farmland corral or fence line, in the early spring because of the white and light snow cover, and it was near twin to what I saw that fall evening in Alberta. If you're looking for this picture, simply Google it to see what I'm talking about. I saw something that put a big scare into me. I'm going to describe it. I'm not sure you'll believe it, but I'm certain about what I saw that day. This happened in August 2009, as I was driving to my husband's place of employment. We live in Gillam, Manitoba, and he is an electrician for one of the generating stations on the river. It was close to 3 p.m. I had just turned off one of the residential roads near my home, ending east on PR 280. About a half a mile after my turn, I caught a glimpse of something tall moving through the trees to my right. Then, suddenly, it jumped onto the shoulder of the road and stood there as I drove by. I looked in the mirror and saw it quickly cross to the other side of the road. I picked up speed and did not stop until I reached the station. I had chills all over. I got a decent look at it. It had a large wolf head, but it was standing upright on legs which looked man-like. I didn't see arms as I passed by, but I did see arms swaying back and forth when I looked in the mirror as it crossed the road. The coloring of the head and body hair was charcoal with darker patches. It was an actual gray wolf, then it was one of the largest ones I had ever heard of. I thought that somebody was playing tricks, but that wouldn't make any sense since it was during hunting season. I did tell my husband, who later checked the area where I saw it. He said that there were reports of a very large wolf along the river a year or two before, but he had not heard of anything beyond that. I still don't know if he believes me. I also said something to my uncle through marriage, who is Chippewa. My uncle told me that it was not a wolf and that I must forget about it. He then recited some words under his breath and told me not to mention it again. That kind of freaked me out. Since it was 5 years ago, I haven't thought much of it until I read a newspaper article about the Dogman and sightings people had in other locations. My Dogman encounter happened on a season opener in November of 2013 in the eastern upper peninsula of Michigan on family hunting property near a town called Cedarville. The house my husband and I were staying up there in had a big front yard, but other than that, the cleared area and the gravel driveway, everything else is pretty deep hardwood forest. I also want to state ahead of time that this happened at around 11 p.m. at night. So everything that's beyond the porch lights was pretty hard to see. My husband and I had gone outside to have a cigarette, and we took our rifle out with us whenever we were hanging around outside, because there's bear and stuff back there in that area. I was up on the porch still, and my husband had gone down the steps into the yard and was facing towards me when we heard these really heavy, slow footsteps coming up the driveway through the woods. It sounded like a really big man, but there was this weird heavy breathing to it, and the footsteps, even though they sounded like a person, sounded heavier than anything I'd ever heard walking in the woods, including full-sized adult bears. My husband looked at me and mouthed, "What the fuck?" And I was trying to figure out what it was that I was hearing, but nothing I had ever heard out there in those woods in my whole life matched the size and breathing and gait of whatever this was, so I was confused and shaking my head. My husband isn't a hunter and grew up in the city, so he was completely confused. I've hunted and tracked basically everything that's indigenous to northern Michigan since I was so small, and I was honestly terrified that this animal was completely unknown to me by sound. It walked out of the tree line at the edge of the yard behind my husband, and it was a lot taller than him, at least 7 feet tall or more, and I'd estimate the weight for its size at around 400 pounds. It was on 2 legs and had super dark black fur that was somehow even darker than the nighttime dark of the woods. It was walking back and forth at that distance from us the whole time this encounter happened, but it would not step into where the perimeter of the porch light was. I had a really hard time making out its torso for that reason, but I saw a wolf-like head and snout with pointed ears that stuck straight up, and instead of front legs and paws, it had really disproportionately long arms and hands. It was on 2 legs this whole time, walking back and forth. I freaked out and grabbed the rifle and just started shooting at it and yelling at my husband to run and get up on the porch. So he did, and then he took the gun from me and told me to find something to use as a weapon and to go inside and to hide. So I did. I got a big knife and went to lock myself in our bedroom, in the closet, and could hear my husband shooting and reloading a bunch for about another 10 minutes. He came in and told me through the closet door that the Dogman had finally run off, but he wasn't sure if it was going to possibly come back, so we were both pretty terrified, and I ended up staying in that closet all night until sunrise with my husband, guarding the door with the gun. He told me that he thought I had hit it when I was shooting at it first, but then the next day, we didn't find any blood or hair or anything, which I thought was weird, because I really thought I must have shot it and wounded it at least a couple of times. It moved incredibly fast though, and was agile enough to run through the brush and stuff, without really mowing it down or making a bunch of noise, like big animals usually do, running through weird dense underbrush. The whole encounter was incredibly weird and scary. My husband also said that he did see it sort of hunch over and drop down onto all fours a few times, while it was running back and forth at the edge of the yard. But that was when it ran away for good that night, that it was running insanely fast on two legs like a man. We didn't see or smell anything bad like a lot of people describe when they see these things. It didn't even leave any noticeable tracks anywhere, even though the thing was so heavy when it was walking up the gravel driveway that I swore the ground near it must have been shaking. We found out later from one of the neighbors that had seen it too, next door, the winter before, when it came up the porch of his cabin and looked in the door window during a party he and his wife had been throwing. He said he heard a really heavy footstep on the porch and pulled back the curtain on the window, and the dogman was standing there on the other side of the glass looking down at him, but that its fur was white then. I think that's probably because there was snow on the ground at that point of the year. My neighbor hollered at everyone in the cabin and told them what he had just seen, and then everyone decided to make a run for it through the woods to his mom's house next door, since her place was a lot sturdier than the hunting cabin. I've known that neighbor my whole life, practically since high school, and he would never make something up like that. He was scared even while he was just talking about it. I also read somewhere online recently that another family, about 45 miles north of our area, had a bunch of livestock like cows and horses turn up dead and torn up by some kind of big predator, and that one of the guys in the family saw a giant upright wolf back near his hunting blind spot during deer season, which of course freaked me out since we had our experience on season opener. The land butting up to that family's property is hundreds of miles of the national forest, so it would make sense to me that a big animal would hide in and near a protected area like that when it's hearing gunshots everywhere else. My lot and my neighbor's lot are also alongside state land. My husband and I moved since this all happened, but the experience was so upsetting to me that I constantly research online to see if anyone else has seen this thing up north and what their encounter was like. I've even heard that there's a small pack of about 4 or 5 of them that live in the state forest downstate in Isabella County, and that a bunch of locals in the nearby area have seen, and that somebody even saw one at nighttime in downtown Michigan. What scares me about that is the fact that there's no tree cover there, as that's a city. I wonder if people all over the state are seeing these animals because they're getting forced out of their usual hunting territories due to hunting, logging, mining, and that's really all increased over the years. If anyone else from Michigan has had an experience, please, I would love to hear it. I'm a vet student. My university is on top of a hill and outside of town. From my dorm window, which is on the 7th floor, I can see huge wheat fields in the nearby forest. My first encounter was 2 years ago. I have a German Shepherd, who I call Hades, and a husky puppy, which I call Ragnar. The day I left university quite late. It was already dark outside. Usually I don't mind taking them out at night. At night I can let them run without their leashes. They are trained and I know they are going to listen to me. Besides, I knew everyone else knew them and wouldn't hurt them even if they were outside. They have collars that light up since Hades is fully black and Ragnar is fully white, which makes it hard to see him during the winter. I could see them running all around the time. We walked for a while and they were playing and running around. At some point though, Hades stopped and started growling, looking into the wheat fields down the hill. I didn't really think about it. There were bats, owls, and other critters around us. I leashed them, not wanting to run after them if they decided to chase something. After an hour and a half of non-stop growling, I have had enough of it and decided to take Hades home and go out so Ragnar can run a bit more. I got home and expected him to go in his cage. He likes sleeping in there after all. That night though, all he did was stand at the window looking out. Since the pup was whining, wanting to go out again, I tried to drag Hades in the cage and lock him in until I got back. Who knew, maybe he might try going out the window. I got to look out the window. On the parking below, I saw a black figure circling the cars. Thinking that it might be someone trying to steal, I got a flashlight and shone at it. It wasn't a thief. It wasn't a human at all. It looked up, and its eyes reflecting the light from the flashlight. It was black, its head looking very similar to Hades. It was standing on all fours, but when I shone the light, it stood up. The roofs of the cars were barely reaching its midsection. It let out a growl, which I later learned that many of the tenants have heard. Hades went wild trying to bust out of the cage. Ragnar was whining even louder. I realized he didn't want to go out though. He was trying to get as far away from the window as possible. The growl made me flinch, and I dropped the flashlight through the window. I tried to see it again, but it was too dark. I heard the crunching of snow as it left. The next morning, I went to find my flashlight and found a huge dog-like footprint in the snow and a foul smell still lingering. I borrowed infrared binoculars from a hunter friend of mine. Ever since then, I have seen it in the forest, crossing the field and coming near the hill, looking up. I and my roommate have been taking turns keeping watch at night when Hades starts growling. I don't take the dogs out at night, and Ragnar doesn't play and run around anymore. He just stays pressed against my feet. When I first took this job to be an over-the-road trucker, I thought it would be really exciting. I thought I'd get to travel the country and see the sights and come home with stories to tell my friends and family. I was right. This job is exciting, but I soon found out that I'm better off not sharing these stories with anyone close to me. Not because I don't trust them, but because I'm worried that they wouldn't believe me. Let me back up. My name is Brittany. I'm 22 years old and I've been driving with a rather large company now for a few months. I won't name due to obvious reasons though. Ever since my training ended and I got my own truck to start solo, I've seen some pretty weird stuff. When you are driving the loneliest road in America, yes, that is a real name, in the middle of nowhere, Nevada, things can start to get to you. I suppose it was only a matter of time before I saw something out in the desert at nearly midnight. I still had another hour to the nearest truck stop, and blasting the freezing cold air against my face was all I could do to keep myself from dozing off at the wheel. Irresponsible, I know, but until you work this job, you don't understand how much lax comes with it. I was driving this highway in the desert in the pitch blackness of a cold summer night, when suddenly, something runs out in the road in front of me. Before I can even react, it's gone across the other side into the bushes. I barely even got a good look at it, but I could have sworn it looked like a large white dog, faster than any dog I've ever seen. I try to just ignore it and keep driving. I see animals crossing the road at night all the time. It didn't seem like anything to get worked up about. Not even a minute later, I feel my truck lurch to the left and into the other lane. I quickly try to swerve and correct it, and easily step on the brakes so I don't wreck. It could be easy to jackknife an 80,000-pound metal death machine. I slow it down and regain control. I looked for the nearest pullover spot so I could see what the hell just hit my rig, and see if there's any damage. Once I find a spot and turn off, hit my brakes and hop out. I walk around to the other side and see a large dent in the side of my trailer. What in the hell? I say to myself as I walk over to inspect the side of the trailer. It's a huge dent, at least 5 feet wide and tall. No real shape to it, just a general dent. I can't imagine what could have hit me. My first thought was maybe a boulder rolled down from the side of the hill and smashed into me, but I didn't think I was driving next to any hills or mountains. As far as I knew, it was just flat desert. I hear the sound of dirt crunching under footfall behind me, and I turn around. My breath catches in my throat, and my stomach drops as I see something standing not even 50 feet away from me. It's large, menacing, and white. I can't even find the words to describe what this thing looked like. It looked like a very large dog, and that's a stretch. It stood on 2 legs, stout legs, with long forearms reaching down past its knees. Its shoulders were broad and heaving, as if it had just ran a marathon. Its head was mostly shaped like a wolf, with a large snout filled with razor-sharp teeth bared in a snarl, saliva dripping from its maw. Its jet-black eyes bore right through me, filled with hatred and hunger. I couldn't move. I was frozen in place. This creature stood between me and my only salvation, my truck. We stared at one another for a moment until I broke the silence. "You are one ugly motherfucker," I said. It snarled at me. Then, very unexpectedly, it turned and walked away slowly, using all four of its limbs, receding into the bushes and into the night. I stood there for what felt like several minutes, wondering if it ever would jump back out and feed on my flesh at any moment. It never came back. I ran around the front of my truck and jumped inside, locking the door quickly and flooring it, as fast as you can floor an 18-wheeler, which is not at all. Soon, I was back on the highway and barreling down it as if my life depended on it. For a while, it felt like it did. Within a half hour, I found myself at the truck stop and shut down for the night. Sleep was difficult that night. I was certain every noise I heard was that damn creature returning. Luckily, though, the night went on without another incident. I have more stories to tell, but this is getting long, so I'll stop here. Remember, everybody, be careful out there on the road. You never know what else is out there with you. I can never look at the woods the same again after that night. You see, I was a man of the woods. I would camp and enjoy the wildlife alone. One time, I decided to bring my wife along. We were deep walking along the edges of the mountains. A river ran wide and for miles. As time got near dark, we set up the tent and then held each other by the fire that we started. Soon, though, the sky started to get gray and rain fell. As we slept in the tent, I was having a hard time staying asleep, so I decided to unzip the tent from the bottom and look out a little to sleep for a little bit. On the other hand, my wife was passed out and was a hard sleeper. I guess she just felt safe. As I look outside, I was just seeing woods and a grass opening just beyond that. There was no moon out that night, but the stars were. For a while, things seemed normal until I could start to see some type of thing dragging a deer with its insides hanging out of its stomach. This thing looked to be tall and was skinny and hairy. Its arms was long and its claws swung to its waist as it dragged the deer. It looked like a wolf walking on two legs, or like a dogman thing, they say. It was hideous. Its mouth was naturally open, showing its nasty teeth. This thing released the deer on the ground and started to feed. I could hear it growl in odd vocal sounds as it ripped off the flesh and ate. It then looked up with its green eyes, seeing me peek in the corner of the tent. Not moving its eyes, it just looked at me, eating the deer, and then slowly stepped back and faded into the dark woods. I remained in fear and questioned all night, wondering if it was going to come back, but it never did. Finally, morning came and I rushed us out of the woods. My wife knew something was wrong because I didn't talk much. We made it out and haven't been back in the woods since. My wife has no idea what I saw that night, and I will never tell her. What really gets me is I was just about to go outside of the tent and walk for a moment. I wonder how things would have played out if he came and seen me out of the tent, or even worse, got to my wife when I simply could have been a few feet away. I'll never camp again now that I know what's really going on in the woods. Around 2002, I was about 6 and traveling around coastal rural Ireland with my uncle. We parked the caravan on a beach underneath a cliff face, and it started to get dark. We decided to rest up for the night. I can't remember the time, but I woke up later on in the night. It was pitch black outside. The caravan was very warm and cramped, so I decided to get some fresh air. There were several others in the caravan, but they were all definitely asleep. As I got out of bed and headed towards the door, I noticed it was already open slightly, and what I seen is still seared into me this day. I seen what I can only be described as a bipedal dog or a dog man. Like many descriptions I've read, the creature was around 6 to 7 feet. It dwarfed me entirely. It had a pronounced snout, matted black fur, a human-like frame, but I believe it was wearing some kind of robe or rags. Its eyes were this iridescent, hypnotic, and terrifying yellow color, almost glowing in the darkness. I did not get a good look at its feet or legs. Now this is where the story takes a turn. The creature spoke to me. Whatever this thing was, it was trying to communicate. The creature itself was making a series of low, guttural, rhythmic growls. However, I was able to interpret these as words, whilst the entity was growling. I heard a low, booming voice inside my head. I can't remember word for word what it said, but it mentioned death almost exclusively throughout the conversation. The creature didn't move, and I couldn't stop looking into its eyes for the duration of this encounter. The encounter rounded off with me breaking eye contact and curling up in a ball of hysterics. The creature left almost instantaneously, and my uncle woke up shortly afterwards. I tried to explain, but of course he didn't believe me. I had stayed at my friend's place by Lansing for a couple of weeks and decided to take off and head towards the shore of Lake Michigan, up through Petoskey and over the peninsula. It was dark by the time I got to Pentwater, a small resort town on the shore of Lake Michigan in the western part of the state. I was kind of confused at a stop sign and lurched to a stop, started and stopped. I looked up and there was a police officer stopped to my right. I decided to make a right turn, then turn into a neighborhood. I made my way back to the main road and took a right. As I turned back on the main road, I saw a small hill going up into a wooded area on the left. I saw some sort of animal in the grassy area between the road and the trees. I thought to myself, oh cool, I'm going to get to see some wildlife, like a possum or a badger. But as I got near it, it seemed to move in a very unnatural way for an animal like that. Sort of too fast and too jerky as it ran to the side and then down the hill. It appeared to be brown and reddish tobacco colored and furry. It looked much larger too, more like human size. After I passed it, I looked up in my rear view. The animal had stood up on its hind legs and ran across the street, leaning over with its front arms hanging down. Classic werewolf type horror movie pose. I had been planning on camping out in that area, but no way. I drove over 2 hours before I stopped finally. If you or someone you know has a story, encounter, or experience you would like to share with my viewers, please send it to my email at stories@whatlurksbeneath.com. Thank you. It was about July 5th, 2015. It was late, about 3:30 a.m. I had fallen asleep on my cousin's sofa, about 10 p.m. after a long day at our family reunion. All of a sudden, the dog started going crazy. It woke me up, so I kinda laid there, thinking to myself, I wish they would shut up. Then, all of a sudden, I heard one of the dogs yell out like it was hurt. Then I heard the sound of something coming up on the front porch, so I sat up to look out the front window. It just so happens that we left the porch light on, and what I saw was unforgettable and unbelievable. It was squatting down right in front of me. I guess it was too big to stand straight up on the porch. I don't know why it was there, but we had left the empty beer and soda cans and leftover food scraps and a couple of trash bags to be thrown out the next day. But, to make a long story short, I was no more than 8 to 10 feet away from it. I looked at it for what seemed like an hour, but I never actually saw its face because its back was to me the whole time, and I never leave my .45 caliber. But, for some reason, I did not have it with me this time. If I had, you would have had a corpse to show the world, but this thing has become aggressive in this area of Alabama where my family lives. July 8th, it kills my cousin's bulldog. In May, it chases another family member. In June, it looks into a family member's window in broad open daytime. So I'm trying to get some of the guys together and try and kill it, because no one will do anything to research and capture this thing. We know where it lives and how it travels. All we want is for somebody to capture it and remove it. I live in Texas, but my family resides in Alabama, and they are living in fear of this thing, so it has to go one way or another. when my aunt was about 11 or 12 years old. She was helping her older cousin Jerry in the field at her aunt's house in an area they called Screamer in Henry County, Alabama. It was a hot day, and after some time, Jerry grew very thirsty and asked my aunt to walk up the road to the house and get him a glass of water. My aunt then walked through the field back toward the dirt road leading to her aunt's house. Upon reaching the dirt road, she saw two creatures standing on the other side of the road. She stopped and began slowly backing up, and then stopped again. She stood there looking at them, and they looking at her, for about a minute or so, long enough for her to get a good look at them. They were only around 10 feet away from her at that point. She on one side of the dirt road, and they on the other. She described them as standing next to each other. One was, in her estimation, around 5 feet tall, and the other was slightly shorter, around 4 feet tall. She said that she got the impression they were young. She said that they were really hairy and completely covered in dark brownish black hair, that they looked sort of like gorillas but with human-looking faces with hair on them, human-looking hands and human-looking feet. She said their noses were free of hair and that the color of their noses was dark brown or black, as were their feet and hands. They stood very still, other than blinking, just looking at her. Except for being covered in thick hair, their faces looked human with regular human-looking noses. After a minute or so, she took off running as fast as she could back up to the house to get water Jerry had requested. She did not look back as she ran. She got the water and proceeded to walk back toward the field. The creatures were not there anymore. She never told anybody about this incident until just a couple of months ago, because she was always afraid people would make fun of her. This would have been in summer of 1953, with the nearest road being Highway 95. It was a few days after Hurricane Frederick. I was 11 years old at the time. We lived in a trailer on Hurricane Road, and my grandparents owned the Hurricane Landing and Fish Camp, what is now Perkins Landing. We were left without power after the hurricane, so all of our food was on ice. It was about 11 p.m., and my dad asked me to walk to my grandparents' store and get some ice. So I grabbed a flashlight and took off walking. It was less than a quarter of a mile from our house to the store, and I was already very used to walking the route on a daily basis. So I'm walking down the left side of the road, and I could hear the dogs barking and really cutting up. They belonged to an older man who lived in a little white house down the road on the right. He kept them in a pen behind his house, so when I get in the front of the house, I shine my light across the street, at and around the house. Suddenly, I see something very large run from behind the house on two legs. I followed it with my light as it ran towards the woods, and then it stopped and turned and looked at me. Its eyes glowed red in the dark, and all of a sudden, it runs straight at me. It was so fast. I mean, it traveled probably about 30 or 40 yards in just a flash, and then it stopped right at the edge of the road. I was scared frozen. I couldn't scream or run, and we just stood there for what seemed like an eternity, but in all actuality was probably just a second or two. Then suddenly, it let out a high-pitched growling sound, and then I screamed, and it turned and ran, and I ran all the way home. When I got home, I was so upset that I could hardly breathe or talk. My parents finally calmed me down, and I told them what happened, but they didn't believe me. The next day, my dad and my uncle went down there to look for tracks, but they didn't find any. My uncle told me I probably saw a bear, but even I know a bear can't run on two legs. The creature I saw was extremely large. I would have to say now that it was at least 7 feet tall, very broad shoulders, covered from head to toe in dark brown to black hair. His mouth and large, square teeth kind of stuck out from the rest of the face, and the eyes were sunk in. As a veteran, I can tell you that I've never been so scared in my life. I have been reluctant to share my story because of my field of work, and do not want to have people think I'm crazy, as this could severely damage my career. But as I get older, I feel this incident needs to be documented. The incident occurred in the winter of 1980, just a few miles east of Clayton, Alabama, in Barber County. I was traveling with my aunt, grandmother, and 4 younger cousins to a relative's house. It was dark and probably around 9 p.m., from the best that I can remember. For some reason, though, my aunt needed to turn around and proceeded to pull off the roadway by a small clearing. I was in the front seat of the car with my aunt, who was driving, and my grandmother. As we turned off the road, the headlights caught a figure in mid-stride. It then immediately froze and did not move anymore. It was about 30 yards away from the car, very close. I could see the entire side view of this creature, and its body was slightly turned so that it was looking at us. The most terrifying thing in my memory is this thing's huge eyes glaring at us. The best way I can describe the creature's expression is stunned. The face was covered in hair except for around the eyes. The hair was dark and appeared longer and wavy looking on the arms and legs. It was very tall and massive, but yet also lean looking. I would say it was easily over 7 feet tall, if not more. When it froze in the headlights, one arm was slightly extended behind the creature, and it held this position. At this point, my grandmother was crying and begging for my aunt to drive away. 2 of my younger cousins were huddled on the floorboard in the back seat crying. I was terrified but could not look away. My aunt kept telling my grandmother, "There is no way he can get in this car," and she kept the car still, and we watched this motionless creature for about 2 to 3 minutes. It was almost completely motionless. It was as if the creature thought we could not see him if he did not move. I don't know how it stood so still. The hair on my neck is standing on end as I type this. It scared me terribly. He kept staring at us with those eyes stretched very wide open. I'll never forget that look he gave us. Finally, my aunt decided to flash the lights on and off real quick. The instant that she did this, the creature jumped toward the woods and was gone. He was about 10 yards from the woods, but made it there in less than a second. I can't believe how fast this huge creature could move. The event itself traumatized me. I have never been able to go into the woods alone or enjoy camping since this event. I tried to deer hunt but could not enjoy it and quit. I cannot sit alone in a tree stand without thinking of this creature and becoming tense. I can't imagine coming upon this thing alone in the wilderness. I know these creatures exist. There is no doubt in my mind. I saw one up close and personal. We never saw the creature again. My grandmother says that she and my late grandfather saw a strange creature near their home in the early 1950s. This home is located about 4 miles from my original 1980 sighting. She and my grandfather went out on the front porch late one night and saw a creature standing in the edge of the woods near the house. They could only see its chest and arms in the shadows. She said it was tall and hairy. My grandfather yelled at the creature, and it ran back into the woods, towards a stream, and made a great deal of noise thrashing throughout the trees and brush. She said they did find some strange 3-toed footprints the next day, but they never had another encounter with the creature after my incident. I was driving a VW bus, so I had a good view of my surroundings. As I rounded the first corner of the exit, I noticed what I thought was a big white dog, like an Afghan running on all fours towards the road, up on an embankment. We both reached the same point at the same time, and I thought I would hit the dog. It seemed it didn't notice my car until it reached the side of the road, when it was only feet away. I don't remember slowing much, but I wasn't going very fast to start with, as the curve was pretty tight. As the creature reached the road and I saw it, it stood up on its back legs. It was covered with long white hair, maybe 8 inches long. It wasn't thick but more stringy and dirty looking, and it had a round head, not a dog. I passed the creature and didn't catch it in my mirrors as it was dark. It scared me. I didn't get much detail of its face, but I did notice a fairly large mouth, or lips, which were very prominent. The head was not huge and the body was fairly slender. It was probably as tall as the VW when it stood up, well over 6 feet. On November 9th, 2008, a suspicious knocking was heard about 3 a.m. as my husband was camping with Boy Scouts on the side of a ridge southeast of Henderson Peak, about 200 yards from State Road 281. This is just south of the Chiaja State Park line. It was about 14 degrees with intermittent howling wind. There were 3 sets of 2 knocks each, about 100 yards north of the campsite, described as a piece of firewood hitting another. It was very loud, and the knocks, though themselves rhythmic, were spaced so that the wind died down before they occurred again. These were not little limbs hitting each other, and he was not able to determine if there was any response because of the wind. There were no campers north of them, and the only other campers on the mountain that were encountered was another Boy Scout troop, camping about 4 miles away, directly on Lake Chinobi. My husband is an avid Bigfooter, who awoke and immediately felt that this was consistent with other knocking activity. Due to the inclement conditions and not wanting to scare the younger kids in the camp, he did not have the chance to follow up. Although he didn't mention the sounds the next morning, another adult did, and with careful roundabout questioning, all other factors for the sounds were excluded, like trees falling, wind, limbs hitting each other due to the wind, etc. I am typing this since he was not sure of the cause of the sound, and was reluctant to report something that may not have been genuine. There are other reports of activity in the Talladega areas, and we know of one other not reported in Perry County. This particular sighting happened in July of 2007, and was about a 1-hour drive, shorter as the crow flies, from this incident. My husband also observed suspicious activity as a youth, 12 to 14, while hiking with his uncle somewhere in the vicinity of the Vincent County, in the form of a huge noise about 40 yards from them as they stood in a creek, and upon climbing out observed twisted branches about 2 inches thick and uprooted bushes, which was taken as the huge sound they heard. He was not interested nor had knowledge of Bigfoot at the time. It affected them so much, though, immediately, and they left the area. About 7 years ago, my wife and I were at a lake in the middle of the Talladega National Forest in Alabama. The lake was Sweetwater Lake. We were fishing in a small boat at the end of a slough early in the morning. We were the only ones at the lake. I think it was on a Wednesday, and we were all alone. We heard something scream. It started out as a howl and turned into a long, high-pitched scream, and it was so loud that it echoed through the mountains. It made the hair stand up on the back of our necks. But that is not all. About a year before that, my stepfather and I were hiking around the same lake. We like to fish a spillway on the back side of the lake. About half a mile into the hike, we crossed a fire break about 20 feet wide. Now keep in mind that we are pretty good, way back in the woods. We have crossed rocks, thorns, and briars, and all kind of rough ground. And right there across the dried mud in the fire break is a set of footprints dried into the mud. They were not huge, they were about the size of a full-grown man, but they didn't look human. I just couldn't understand why a man would be this far back in the woods without shoes on. And over the years, there's one thing I have thought about a Bigfoot would have to grow up. So maybe it was a juvenile. At the end of January 2013, I was traveling north on Alabama Highway 51 in northern Coffee County, in a rural area approximately 1 mile south of the Dale County line, just before dark. I estimate the time to be around 5 p.m. As I approached a left curve, I noticed a large dark mass in the roadway. At this point, I was within 100 yards of it. Suddenly, it moved to my right, and in about 3 steps, it was on the shoulder of the road, facing me. It was a bipedal creature, approximately 9 feet tall, with a shoulder span approaching 4 feet, with the most intense yellow-green eyes that I've ever seen, spaced around 6 to 8 inches apart. In my headlights, I could see it was covered in gray-brown hair. The face was ape-like with dark brown, black, leathery skin. This creature lifted its left arm, possibly to shield its eyes or perhaps anticipating being hit, as I was about 30 feet from it. Then I was past it. It took several seconds for the significance of what had occurred to sink in. In 1979 and 1980, I was living in my grandparents' old home place on our family farm in Alabama. The farm was about 300 acres of woods, covering an area of deep hollows leading down to sloughs off a river. In late summer and fall of '79, we had been having trouble with deer poachers and some cattle rustling on our farm. So I was spending a lot of time out at night and on my off days trying to catch them. Several times at night and a couple of times during the day, I had heard strange screams back in the woods towards the river. The first time I heard them, I thought it might be a peacock or a screech owl, but it really didn't sound like either, and it seemed to be much louder and much more prolonged. I really didn't think much of it until one night I was walking back to the house from the back of the farm at about 11 p.m. It was a clear night with a bright half moon shining, and I could see quite well. I was skirting along the south edge of the woods, about a half mile due north of the house, when suddenly I got a creepy feeling that I was being watched and or was in danger. My skin started crawling, and the hair on the back of my neck and hands stood up. At the same time, my dog, a large Doberman Pinscher, started acting nervous and whining quietly, and started looking back over his shoulder to our left towards the woodline. I eased the safety off my rifle and increased my pace. Right at that instant, something screamed right in the edge of the woods, less than 35 yards behind and to the left of us. The pitch and volume of the scream was incredible. I could feel my chest vibrating from the loudness of the scream. My dog and I both broke, and I ran to our right into the pasture, about 50 yards, and I spun around and stopped with my rifle up to see if it was chasing us, but it wasn't. I stood there with my rifle up, and whatever it was screamed at us 5 or 6 more times. Also, I could hear movement in the dry leaves where the sound was coming from. It sounded like a large person pacing back and forth. I could also see the tops of some saplings and the small trees sway and move as it bumped into them or pushed and pulled on them. The screams were longer lasting and a little lower pitched than what I had heard before. I also know for sure that they weren't bobcat screams. I became aware of the sound of our cattle running away towards the southwest. The woods got quiet, but I knew it was standing there, still watching me, but I never saw anything. I backed away for about 100 yards and then broke into a jog back to the house, spinning around and stopping with my rifle up and about every 50 yards or so, just to make sure it wasn't following me. A few nights go by. I was up late, 1:30 a.m., and getting ready for bed. I came out of the bathroom into my bedroom, and my dog was standing there, staring towards the front of the house. He was completely stiff, with the hair standing up on the back and the neck, and he was growling very low and menacingly. It was the only time I have ever seen him do that, and he was deadly serious. I got a glimpse of a shadow move across the corner of my front bedroom window, moving towards the west side of the house. The moon was shining right on the west wall of the house. My dog turned towards the west and kept growling even more seriously. Then I saw a large, sort of human-shaped shadow move across both windows on the west side of the house. The dog kept turning and growling and following the shadow. Whatever it was, had to have been about 10 feet tall to cast a shadow that far up on the windows. I was petrified with fear. I finally picked up my riot shotgun and chambered a round of buckshot. My dog at this time was staring towards the north window of the spare bedroom and was still stiff, but not growling quite as bad. I got up enough nerve to look out the bathroom window, but saw nothing. My yard was surrounded by a 3-foot-high hog wire fence with 2 strands of barbed wire on top and locked steel gates. So whatever it was stepped over the fence to get into and out of my yard. The gates made a lot of noise if you tried to climb or open them, so it did not come or go through the gates. In the following weeks, while I was walking through the woods near the river, in 2 different locations, I found several deer that had been killed. At the time, I thought poachers had done it, but they were all complete except for having their abdomens torn open and the guts pulled out. None of the meat was gone from any of them, other than what possums or coons had eaten, and most of them had broken legs. Only one was a buck, and it was a yearling spike. One of the deer had been killed right where I found it. There were broken limbs and saplings and hair all around it. There were tufts of deer hair hung in the bark of 2 larger trees next to the carcass. Some of the tufts were over 10 feet off the ground. Both of the deer's back legs were broken and twisted. Even then, I thought that it looked like something had grabbed that deer by the back legs and beaten it to death against the tree. I didn't tell anybody about any of this. My dad and other folks had told me that people had been hearing and seeing strange things along that part of the river for decades. But I had a neighbor that had told about seeing a Bigfoot on his property just a few years earlier, and everybody laughed at him. In the early fall of 1980, my wife was bringing in the wash one night, about 7 p.m. I had fed the horses some oats about 30 minutes earlier, and I was now in the kitchen, and suddenly I heard a scream outside. I ran out and my wife was running in, scared nearly to death. Something was right outside the gate between the storage shed and the tack room, screaming just like before. The horses went running out there, wide open. The fence and gate there is quite high because there is a corral there also. I could hear it moving around, but only get a glimpse of it occasionally. It was much taller than the 6-foot fence there, and it appeared to be black with maybe a little silver or gray mixed in. There's a street light in our yard on that side of the house, and when it moved under through a patch of light, I could see the light glint off its fur. It was tall enough that it hit or shoved aside some tree limbs that I had to jump to be able to touch. It screamed several more times, and I could tell that it was becoming more and more agitated. Between screams, I could hear it making a very eerie, strange noise with an intermittent clicking sound that sounded like it was growling as it chewed or moved its mouth. I ran back to the house and locked all my doors. We moved shortly after that, and I spent hardly any time on the farm until we moved back to the area in 1997. My son, daughter, and I, and a couple of 2 friends were coon hunting on the back of the farm near the river last year, which would have been November 1999. And the dogs were down on the east side of the ridge, and we were waiting up on the top of the ridge for them to tree. We started to hear the same screams as before, 600 yards to the west of us, in one of the areas where I had found a dead deer before. The screams lasted maybe 30 seconds to a minute, and then came to a stop. We had tried to get the dogs to go in that direction earlier, and they wouldn't, and we tried again, but they kept circling back around and going to the truck. And these are championship dogs. I didn't get to go back in the woods there until April of this year, which is 2000. I found fresh deer bones in the area where I had found several dead deer 20 years before. Well, me and my cousin were deep in the woods, deer hunting, close to our little campsite, when we heard some very loud popping sounds, maybe 35 yards away. We froze, tried to figure out the sound, but couldn't. We started walking. It was getting late, almost dark, when we started to smell something. It smelled awful, deader than dead. My cousin hears something walking heavy. We turn around to look down the logging road and sees this thing step out of the tree line. It was a good 40 to 45 yards away and had dark brown hair, walked on 2 legs, and was nearly 9 to 10 feet tall. The thing just stood there. Out of being so scared, we couldn't move either. I couldn't have shot it if I wanted to, but we stared at each other for about 3 or 4 minutes. When it took a step into the woods, we ran. First time ever seeing anything like that. I told some people, but they laughed and asked me how much I had been drinking. But I don't drink, so I saw the sight and decided to get this off my chest. I've been holding on to this for years, and I haven't been deer hunting that far into the woods since then. This was around Highway 72, off of Baker Lane. I was deer hunting in Freedom Hills Management Area, around Coon Dog Cemetery. I entered the woods before daylight and walked down the access road next to a pine forest. I came to the back of some pines where they had turned into heavy hardwoods. I sat down at the bottom of a tree and waited for daylight. During my way up, behind me on top of the ridge, I hear a series of grunting and heavy movement through the woods, walking down the ridge behind, and down the ridge it went. Once daylight came, I walked up to where I first heard the grunting and movement. As I got to the area, I found bedding and hair. The hair I found I kept as a sample, and it wasn't wild hog or bear, nor mountain lion. This whole incident scared me and made me very uneasy. Later that night, we heard wood knocks and had a tree pushed down. At approximately 1:30 in the morning, on a night in February 2000, the witness and a friend were planning to visit a girl who lived close to the sighting location. They were riding together on a motorcycle and knew they would not be able to ride up to the girl's house without altering her mother of their presence. They decided to hide the bike on the side of a dirt road and walk to the house from there. Very shortly thereafter, they began to hear what the witness described as a very heavy walking, stomping noise. The witness described these sounds as similar to 1, an extremely large person walking, or 2, like a horse galloping, but only on 2 legs, coming from a swampy area which was only northeast of their location. They squatted in the bushes and listened for a couple of moments, at which time they determined the noise was getting closer to them and increasing in pace. At this time, they decided to make a break for the motorcycle and vacate the area. The friend of the witness was in the lead and caused a branch to swing back, hitting the witness in the head, knocking him down and damn near knocking him out. He got back up and began running after his friend, all the while hearing the sounds of stomping and crashing of underbrush, getting closer and closer to them. When he reached the spot where the motorcycle had been stashed, his friend was already pushing it out towards the road. He commented that, at this time, he could also hear heavy breathing which seemed to coincide with each footfall. Once they had the bike on the road, they both jumped on and his friend managed to kick-start it and take off. The witness stated that he looked back just in time to see a very large creature leap from the edge of the woods out onto the road. I later measured this distance and it was around 12 feet to 15 foot. He said it hit the road on all fours and then stood, fully erect. He did comment that when the creature landed on the road, it let out an audible grunt he could hear even above the noise of the motorcycle. He said the moon was full, or near full, and it was already in the western sky, causing the creature to stand in its own shadow. Since the creature was silhouetted, he was unable to make out any such details like facial features. However, he did emphasize to me that what he saw was not a bear, as he's seen bears before and they were much more narrow than what he saw. He also emphasized this by hunching his arms forward and dropping his shoulders to indicate how a bear would stand, and then standing fully erect with his arms out from his sides in the stance that he said he observed the creature to be in. He said this creature was very wide and had fluffy-like hair, which covered it entirely. He was unable to see any fingers on the hands, although he did state from what he could tell, the hands appeared to be clenched, and that the arms were no longer than a human's. He also said that from what he could see, the creature appeared to be a dark brown or black color. When asked about the height of the animal, he said it was at least 6 to 7 feet tall. After thinking for a moment, he stated that his father is 6'4", and that this thing was bigger than his dad, making it closer to 7 feet in height total. If you or someone you know has a story, encounter, or experience you would like to share with my viewers, please send it to my email at stories@whatlurksbeneath.com. Thank you. I woke up with a start and heard the most unsettling, rhythmic, pulsating, vibrating noise. I've never heard this noise before, not in real life or even in the movies. I remember feeling alarmed, and then, out of nowhere, this soothing calmness washed over me, and I fell back asleep. 2 months before this, I had sleep paralysis where I was sucked out of my body through the walls of my home, backwards into the night sky. The stars looked like they would in real life if I was actually doing this in reality. The same evening, I also had a spirit of being on a floating table with 4 beings guiding me through walls out of my home. I don't know what it was, but it was freaky. And also, after hearing that noise, I was on my porch at 2 a.m. smoking. I had leaves covering my lawn, so I began hearing something bipedal walking across my yard. Its gait was a very graceful slide. It didn't really disturb the leaves or plow through them. I think it had long legs, whatever it was. Anyway, I was observing and making sure it wasn't the wind or squirrels when the hairs and the back of my neck stood up. I suddenly felt like prey. I'd like to apologize for my English in advance. Not my first language, but I really would like to share my experiences since I kind of kept them all for myself for 20 years. So, I have a habit of waking up in the middle of the night to drink ever since I was little. My mom used to prepare tea or something for me to drink at nighttime. So, I would wake up, drink it, and then go back to sleep. This is key information for my first experience, which happened when I was only around 4 years old. I would wake up to drink and see a glowing blue man figure next to my bed. It was tall and had no facial features at all. It was just an outline of a man shape made of blue light and radiating the same blue light in and of itself. I hope that makes sense. I remember having basic conversations telepathically. I was asked how was I feeling, what happened with me during the day, etc. Well, I finished my drink and all went back to sleep. I don't remember anything more serious, but these encounters went on for about 3 years, and suddenly stopped when I started school. What makes me believe I didn't dream at all was that I woke up only once, same time I saw the thing, and my drink was always finished by morning, which I drank while talking with it. I personally don't think it was a ghost or a dead relative of mine, because at that time, I really didn't have any, and all of this happened in a brand new house which was built by my own parents. It is still a possibility, however. I never mentioned this to anyone at the time because I just knew it wasn't normal. My next experiences happened during primary school. I had a dream where my window opened up and a huge light came in and lifted me up from my bed and took me out the window while I was laying still and felt paralyzed. It shook me up so bad that after I was obsessed with having my curtains closed perfectly so no light could come into my room from the outside. I remember every night I kind of had a panic attack because of this. I was truly scared of something. My mom said she saw me once struggle with my curtains, crying and saying, "Don't take me please, don't take me again." She was freaked out by it but didn't interrupt me. She told me this later when I was a teen and we were sharing stories. The other thing is a little blurry. Can't remember what happened before this, but I got a strong urge to check my right ear. It was then that I saw a needle scar, like a hole in front of my upper ear. It looks like my earring hole, but it's not open like that. I was terrified, and as I was examining it, felt like something solid under my skin was there. I tried to pinch my skin together to get it out, but it didn't work. I was hysterically crying because I wanted it out of my body. I remember I decided I'm going to cut it out, but ended up not doing it. I don't remember anything more than that, just I eventually tried to ignore it because I was scared. Me and my parents ended up getting into an argument because I remember having this as a kid, and their response was to get the baby pictures out, and even the hospital documents of my birth. The documentation doesn't mention anything about the thing in my ear, and nothing is visible on the photos. I still don't know what to think, but the day I made my parents' sister and fiance touch my ears and compare them to each other to validate I'm not imagining this. My right upper ear is kind of puffy, and you could definitely feel something solid under my skin. They all did. They felt it too and were freaked out. This was the first time ever for me to talk about this scar. Since it was weird for all of them, this remained a popular subject for quite a few days. The same week, I started opening up about it, and I was alone one night, fiancé out of town visiting his parents. I went to sleep early and woke up because I felt uneasy. I checked out of the window and I saw blinking stars. They looked like stars, but one moment they were white, and another they were red. They were literally blinking. I know something is up, but I still felt the need to go back to bed, so I did. I woke up in the morning, checked my ear, and the solid thing was gone. My right upper ear was still puffy, only the solid thing had disappeared. Weeks passed, and I was trying to ignore all of it as much as I could, out of fear, as I always did. Then, a month later, I had the same blinking star experience, and the next morning, the solid thing was back in my ear again. At this point, I'm traumatized. I tried to ignore it for as long as I could, but that clearly didn't do much for me. I feel anxiety every time just from the mention of extraterrestrials, UFOs, and aliens. I can't watch movies or read about them without feeling uneasy. I don't have a clear picture of what I went through, but it's clear enough it wasn't anything remotely positive. I tried meditation a few times because I thought it might be helpful, but as soon as I start relaxing my body and mind, I see this. I see through my own eyes. I'm in a white room with 3 beings. I'm laying on a hospital bed, paralyzed, and I have white sheets covering my legs. The being closest to me looks like a gray alien, holding something as if it's examining me. There is a door in front of me, and each side of the door stands 1-to-1, a reptilian-looking alien. I'm not sure what people experience during meditation. Maybe it just was my mind playing tricks. Maybe it was a memory fragment. I really don't know. So far, these are my experiences. So, I was up in rehab in the mountains of Pennsylvania. Like, really up there. In fact, you could look down at this tiny town and see the entire town and all the empty land past it for miles. There were security cameras around the premise. One day, one of the older counselors asked me and a few of the other guys if we wanted to see a UFO. He whipped out his phone and showed up a video he took with his phone of a computer. On the computer is security footage playing from one of the cameras that is aimed at a small outdoor area with some tables. But you can also see a hilly part of the mountain and the sky beyond that. We were all watching, and this glowing orange disc comes and hovers by the mountain, rocking back and forth. It is there for 20 seconds or so, then shoots off up into the sky. I recognized the area the security camera was aimed at, and it was straight from the recordings. Really interesting. This one, I was probably in 3rd or 4th grade. Me and my best friend at the time were on a school field trip at a local amusement park. We were on the top of the Ferris wheel when a rainbow disc came roaring through the sky. And it was close. We got a really good look at it. It was like a thick frisbee that had a gray metallic center with red, yellow, orange, and blue lining on the outside. We got down and ran to our parents, telling them about it. But they didn't see or hear anything. No one else seemed to have seen it. For years, I wrote it off as a dream I had. But a couple of months ago, I actually reached out to my friend on Facebook and asked him if he remembered it, and he did. I was at a dark point in my life after rehab, and I got an apartment, but due to roommates bailing on the lease, I had to move back home. I was at my lowest. I had lost my father while in rehab, lost my girlfriend, whom I was still very in love with, and experienced a few friends dying, one of which I blamed for myself. It seemed that everything I had gone through and everything I had worked towards in the past year and a half had meant nothing, and I was right back to where I started. I felt alone. I went outside at night at 1 a.m. and looked at the stars and asked for a sign. I'm not religious, so I don't know who I was asking, but something answered. I saw a green light in the sky. It looked like a combination of the Northern Lights and a SpaceX rocket launch, but it was a ball. It spread out, and it looked kind of like an angel, only how a child would draw one. It was beautiful and mesmerizing, like a being of pure energy. I felt so at peace, like something greater than my comprehension was looking out for me and telling me not to give up. Back in spring of 2012, I went through a few weeks where I just traveled around central Texas and camped at wherever I was closest to come dinner time. One night I ended up real close to Enchanted Rock, a nifty little mountain halfway between Llano and Fredericksburg. I like to sleep under the stars while the weather is nice, and it was in the 70s that evening. Perfect for it. I went up the mountain about a quarter way up and broke away from the trail to find an okay spot for my tarp and bedroll. After setting up, cooking a light meal and eating, I lay down for the night. As I was drifting off, I heard a strange sound. I didn't think much of it until a light cast itself along the trail, just a couple 100 feet away. I bolted up, slipped on my boots, and ran to the nearest tree. The light searched around for a while, never really coming close to my camp or me, and then just turned off. The noise, which had been constant through this time, got really high-pitched, and then a circle of 6 yellow lights came to life above the mountain and flew off to the west. I got back to my camp, packed up and slept up in my truck bed with the cover closed. Another time, around that same time period, but near the end of my adventurous streak, I was at Lake Whitney at one of the dam side parks, Something Bluff. It had been raining all day and everything was absolutely miserable. Sometime before dark, the reason let up and I was able to set up my tent. Given the overall misery of the night, I didn't feel like cooking, so I had an MRE in my tent. After I sealed up my tent and snapped the door closed, I went to bed. During the night, I had an awful bout of sleep paralysis. The inside of my tent got huge, and it was lit up bright white. Around me were 4 bipedal insectoid beings. I didn't feel threatened or anything, just kinda there. After some time of telling myself to wake up, I woke up. My boots were covered in fresh mud, but my tent was still sealed, and my mummy bag was still wrapped up tight, so I ruled out me going pee sometime. Once I got my bag packed and my sleeping bag rolled up, I stepped outside and took a look around. The ground around me was completely dry. There were no footprints and no mud track to my tent from anywhere else around me. Still not sure how my boots got caked in mud the night before, or why my campsite was the only dry one. A few years ago, I want to say 2010 or thereabouts, but I'm not exactly sure, I was taking evening classes at a local community college. It being winter and the class starting at 7 meant it was dark by the time I left the house. Across from our house is a vacant lot and an empty field, with a pair of radio or cell towers in the distance. We're always almost directly on a flight path from the local airport, and we do get the occasional military helicopter fly over courtesy of the nearby Marine base. Point being, I know what these things look like and sound like, even at night. So I was somewhat confused by the sight one night of a steady white light above the cell towers. It wasn't moving or blinking, and too bright to be a star. I watched it for maybe a minute and a half, then shrugged and got in my car. Probably a logical explanation, and I had places to be. So a few minutes later, as I'm driving through the neighborhood, I see the light again, closer this time. What's more is it seems to be moving in my direction. I'm curious enough as to what it is, and then I put my car in park and get out to look. It's hard to judge size, as it is a black object against a black background. Maybe bus size if it was right above treetop level. Far, far larger if it was any higher. There are these bright, steady white lights laid out in a triangular pattern on each corner of it. As I watch, it drifts. That's the first word that comes to my mind, and still I think the best way to describe it. Slow and steady across the road in front of my car. Smooth, unhurried, at a walking pace. There is no noise, no sound of an engine or disturbing the trees as it flies over. The object is completely silent. That is what really got me about it. I mean, my brain can still process what I was seeing, but the sheer fact that something that big could be dead silent was what threw me off. It takes about 30 seconds to drift across the road and disappear behind the trees. That's the last I saw of it. I don't know if what I saw was alien, but they were unidentified flying objects, alright. First was when I was a kid, and I was already into UFOs. Mom, family friend, and I were driving home from visiting family, who, incidentally, had a big book on UFOs and aliens that I read a lot. We were on a rural 2-lane road with scattered houses and no streetlights. A ways ahead, a motorcycle came around the curve and headed towards us, but driving on the center lane. We never heard an engine or saw anything but its white headlight. When it got close, it rose up and went over our car. I looked out the back window, but didn't see anything go behind us or any light shining on anything. I was really excited. Second was over a distant ridge when I was a teen. On the immediate other side of this ridge is a very large public airport. An enormous fan of red-orange light would dim up, stop, dim out, very mechanically, followed by a weird white strobe, also in a fan shape, fast but irregular. They kept repeating, sometimes overlapping. I got my mom out to see it too. I went to go get on the roof for a better view, but saw no more. My mom said that after I went around the house, a glowing orange bar appeared on the horizon. Think of a nearly downsetting sun, but rectangular. Its right end stretched out across the horizon, then the left end followed, like a Star Trek ship going into warp. Last year, I saw a video from Florida of the exact same thing, minus my mom's ending occurrence. I've seen several satellites which did things satellites can't do, say, making a right-angle turn, or I look back and it's going the other way. I've also seen what I thought was a star just blink out. I was out in the evening drawing. I'd drawn the stars on paper, and one was now missing from the sky versus what I drew. Then, there was one in the middle of nowhere, Arizona, around 5 or 6 years ago. Parents and I were driving, and out of the front, we saw a row of moon-like lights blink left to right, hold, then blink off in the same order. Their arrangement suggested a tilted sphere or disc. This was years after the Phoenix lights and didn't look like them. What we saw were round, hazy at the edges, orangey white, and didn't move at all. So, here's my story. When I was about 8 to 11 years old, in the period of about 1971 to 74, I would dream of an alien woman regularly. These dreams were pretty vivid, to the point I felt a strong emotional attachment. The last time I dreamt of being with her, we were on a craft, but I can only remember a round window looking at Earth as we headed toward it. The last conversation, no words spoken, it was more telepathic, had went like this: "You're going back now. I won't be visiting you again, but I'll always be here with you." Next thing I remember was that I was on a train for no apparent reason. Then I awoke. I have not dreamt of her since. Then one day, when I was about 24, I had moved into a new shared house. I was sleeping on a fold-out bed in the middle of the day, then thought to myself, shit, they're here. Next, I felt my sides being poked. I think in that annoying way your uncle might, but it was uncomfortable. I could only move my eyes and was being pressed into the bed, as I felt the presence of about 4 beings who, for some reason I know, were different in stature and rank. 2, I think, was kind and keeping the others in check. I was not scared, but angry. Then lights went out. I awoke about 6 hours later, as people walked in and closed the door. I acted as if nothing happened, never said a word. Some years later, I was driving in Sydney and spotted a poster for a new book. This book was Whitley Strieber's Communion. For the first time, I recognized the face in my dreams. It was the face on the cover. I was pretty shocked. It seemed to bring what I had put down to a silly group of dreams into reality. I had one more episode when I pulled my car over to stop for alcohol. My mate got out of the car, and I spotted something in the rearview mirror, and lights out. My mate returned. I asked how long he was gone. He said about 20 minutes, but it seemed much, much longer. Again, I said nothing, but I did act up at the pub that night. I've seen many lights in the sky all my life, especially when I was younger. It was always as if I could summon them, even amaze my friends with that. They've been gone for a while now, and I feel abandoned. So, it was about 2004, and I was about 19 at the time. I was over at my friend's apartment, and there were 5 or 6 of us hanging out in her living room. For background, she lived on the 2nd floor above a shopping complex and suburb outside of Buffalo, New York. We hung out there often and never had any sort of weirdness go on. Well, one day, we're there at around 6 p.m. in the summertime, so it was definitely still daytime, when all of a sudden, a super bright light engulfed the entire room and paralyzed each of us at the same time. Now, when I say bright, I mean it was as if we had headlights on a car shined right in our eyes. Except, this bright light paralyzed us in that we couldn't move or speak. We were just there. The light was so bright, it lit up what seemed to be the entire apartment, and outside as well. It lasted what we think is about 15 seconds, which seemed like an eternity. Once it ended, we were freaking out. We were sure something would be on the news or other people would be posting online asking the same question, what it was. But nothing. To this day, we all recall this instance and have no clue what it was. But as the years go on, the more convinced I am that it was an alien involved, as I can't give any logical explanation on what the hell it could have been. I've scoured Google and searched YouTube, you name it, looking for anyone with a similar story or a possible explanation, but have yet to find anything or anyone who can relate. I was 17. I am now 30. I've had many years to reflect on said event, and I'd like to get some outside opinions. The events of this night have never sat well with me. I had gone camping at a campground outside of Peterborough, Ontario. The year was 2006. There was a group of 6, 4 females, 2 males. All of us in 11th and 12th grade. Our second night, I hadn't drank as much as the first night, so I recollect this night very well compared to the first. I recollect well of what I can remember. The rest is blank. The second night, my gut was still recovering from the first night, so I only had 1 drink this particular evening. We were having a great time, sitting around the campfire and just doing what teenagers do. We had marshmallows, hot dogs, burgers, etc. At a later point in the evening, we all decided to go on a group walk, as some of us were much more intoxicated than others. We had gotten bored and wanted to see if there were any other young campers around our age we could meet up with. At some point, I was separated from the group. I had gone off into the bushes to pee, because the campground bathrooms were still quite a ways away. Apparently, my friends didn't wait for me or didn't hear me say I was breaking off from the group for a moment. I remember squatting to pee, and that's it. I remember having my pants around my ankles, and then nothing at all. It was around 2 a.m. at this point. I maintained that I only had 1 alcoholic drink that night and was not intoxicated. The next thing I remember, I was walking, more stumbling through the woods. I felt extremely disoriented, dizzy, off balance. I stumbled and fell to the ground, hit my forehead on a relatively small rock. I rolled over onto my back and looked up. I could see the sky was beginning to lighten. It was pitch black when I had departed from the group. I rubbed my forehead and my eyes to be sure the sky was indeed getting brighter. I stood up and looked around. I could hear my friends talking, which confused me. If the sky was light, I must have been lost for hours, at least 2 or 3. I walked out of the woods. When I emerged, my tent mate saw and yelled, "Where have you been? We looked for you for like 2 hours. We just got back to the campsite like 30 minutes ago." This confused me because I had emerged on the opposite side of the road, but directly in front of the campsite we had rented. However, we were not in this end of the park when I had broken away from the group to pee. We were at the opposite side of the campground when I had gone missing. The 5 others confirmed this. I had no explanation of what happened and said, "I just walked away for a second." I said to wait for me. And they saw I was shaken and legitimately upset and confused as well, and dropped it. My tent mate and I turned in for the night, and he asked me again what happened, and I reiterated what I clearly remembered. I was pissing, pants around my ankles, and then nothing until I fell and hit my head on the rock. He was sober at this point and still confused. He hugged me, and we settled in for about an hour of sleep. Sleep didn't come. He seemed genuinely worried because he knew there's no way I should have emerged from the forest where I did. If anything, had I been wandering for 2+ hours, I should have found the paved trail that allowed vehicles access to the campsites. When I was 17, I lost interest in school. I felt as if I just kept learning the same thing. I asked my mother if I could try for a GED instead, and she of course said no. But when my principal told her I should, due to my low credits, I finally convinced her to let me. About a month later, I had my 18th birthday. I was still living at home, trying to find a job, but no luck. 3 weeks or so after my 18th birthday, I went to bed like any normal night, though I do remember going to bed earlier than expected. I woke up at 3 a.m., walked to my bathroom to use it. When I walked back into bed, I looked at my phone again, 3:05 a.m. I lay back down. Then I realized I didn't plug my phone, so I'm going to turn around to plug it in. Then I realize I can't move. I'm telling my body to move, but I am not moving, so I start panicking. I try making any noise with my mouth. Nothing. I realize I can still move my eyes, so I look around my room, shooting in every direction. Then, I saw an outline from the light of my doorway. I felt relief thinking it was my mother. She will save me. Then I realized that the figure outline wasn't of my mother. The head was too big, the body too skinny. Then I remember a bright, brilliant light engulf me. Suddenly, I am screaming and yelling, and then I realize I'm on my bed. My parents have ran into my room, and I am shaking like a leaf. Told them what happened. My mom tells me it's a nightmare and not to worry. And then I lay down in bed and look at my phone. 5:15. Where the hell have I been? Then I realize my ears feel like I was at a concert for 2 hours without earplugs. I was also very concerned it would happen again. I ended up passing out from sheer exhaustion. After the first abduction, that's when stuff started getting really bad. I think I started having sleep paralysis dreams and remembering what they did to me. I remember waking up not being able to move in my bed. It was morning time, so I knew I wasn't being abducted. I felt pain in my genitals, as if somebody was entering me with no lube. By the way, I was a virgin at the time and had never experienced penetration before. I am not religious at all, but my brain was calling out for me to call for God, or anyone. I just felt so hopeless, so scared I wanted it to end. I finally was able to move, and so I sat there, crying on my bed. I felt so hopeless. I didn't want to tell anyone of fear of being seen as insane. A couple days later, I went to the bathroom, got up from the toilet. Normally, my whole back gives out and can't get up. Call for someone to help me. My mom comes and asks, "Do you need toilet paper?" And I tell her that I can't get up. She helps me up and I can't straighten my back out. There's too much pain. She asks me what's wrong, and I tell her I think my back gave out. "You're 18, your back can't give out." Try to straighten out again, and I can't. There's too much pain. My mom calls a family friend who is a chiropractor. She tells me my mom too came to her practice for emergency adjustments. My mom helps me into the car. Sitting was so uncomfortable, each bump of the road was just pain. We finally get to her practice and she checks my back. T3 and T4 is seriously out of alignment. She adjusts my back, gives me a TENS unit, which is electrical nerve stimulation. We are driving home as the TENS unit works its magic on my back, spasming muscles. I suddenly feel watched. I look up and see 3 balls of triangular light and tell my mom, "What are those?" And she asked what. Then I blinked, and when my eyes opened, we were almost home, which shouldn't be possible. I asked my mother, "Did you see those lights?" And she asked me again, "What lights?" And then I said, "How did we get home so fast?" She shrugged her shoulders, but didn't care she was almost home. I would have vivid, horrible dreams about being in some weird medical table with a huge needle going into the base of my skull. It was reoccurring one that It was a reoccurring one that would happen every so often. I would always wake up expecting for my neck to hurt, but it never did. Well, fast forward 3 years, I have a job, a significant other. Life's pretty good, and the alien abduction craziness has gone away, though it always sits in the back of my mind. My significant other sleeps with me, so I stopped experiencing weird things at night. But I'm wondering if they just knock me out better because there's 2 people now. I tell my fiance about pain I experience on the daily, and she tells me I should probably see a doctor, find out if I have an autoimmune disease, and even the doctor think that's weird, but not unheard of. I still get lapses in time, false memories, and other things. Keeping it together is hard, but talking to a therapist and talking to friends who actually believe me has made me feel less alone and less scared. My significant other believes me as well, though she doesn't believe in aliens. She said what I experienced is real, and she thinks it's the government who abducts people to push the alien narrative, which is an interesting take on that.